Welcome to Customer Love Stories, a podcast where we investigate why certain brands are loved or not by their customers. I'm your host, Robi Ganguly, CEO and co-founder of Apptentive. For those of you who don't know, Apptentive is a Seattle-based voice of the customer solution. We work with some of the world's largest and most beloved brands to capture invaluable feedback across the mobile customer journey and enable them to take action in order to win back customers and really activate their fans at scale. I'm joined today by Carlos Gonzales de Villaumbrosia, CEO of Product School. And Carlos and I have known each other throughout the product community for a couple of years, and then I joined him on his podcast, which I encourage everybody to listen to. It's awesome content on building products. I joined him about a year ago as well. And so we've talked about some of these concepts abstractly, but I've never put him on the spot and made him talk about what fandom looks like to him. So Carlos, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show, Robi. Nobody has ever put me on the spot to talk about fun, so I'm excited.
Perfect. So let's start there. Who or what are you a fan of?
You made me think when you asked me that question, because my mind immediately went to my soccer team. And this is mostly, it wasn't my decision. I think this is because my family told me, you have to follow this team, or my friends, my school, my environment. And I started analyzing now the reasons why. And I realized that while that could bring some positive connotations, I also think that could bring some negative connotations. And I'm not necessarily a fan of that decision that was made for me many, many years ago. So I'm a fan of sports. I actually like playing more than watching. And I'm truly a fanatical of tennis. I play and I follow my favorite tennis player is called Rafa Nadal. And I actually like him for what he represents on and off the court. This is for people who might not know, one of the top 10 players in the world. He's been number one for many, many years. But most importantly, he really shows the values of sportsmanship. He really appreciates when he wins, when he loses. He's always proud of representing his country and his team members. It is something that resonates with me across multiple levels, including life and work.
That's awesome. And I think I love two parts of that. The first is the recognition that some of your fandom was inherited, right, from your family, and the idea that you have to examine that and think about where it comes from. I want to come back to that in a little bit, but let's stay here with Nadal. When did he grab you? How did you first encounter him, and what about him grabbed you? When can you remember being like, oh yeah, that's my guy?
So when I started practicing this sport, because I chose that sport. I think I grew up playing soccer because I'm from Spain and everyone there has to play soccer, right? So I felt a lot of peer pressure to follow a specific team and to play a specific sport. So when I was a little bit older, moved to the States, I was given the option to choose a sport, right? And I randomly picked tennis and I started liking it and I was good at it. So I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I was good because I made that choice. And I think it also made me realize that I was choosing a specific sport, in this case, athlete, for more than just a specific sport. Sometimes I've seen myself in situations where being a fan brings negativity. Like being a fan of something might imply hating something else, right? Or hating a city or hating a country, which doesn't make any sense. It means also sometimes not having an objective perspective on something. And also it feels like you are stuck. Once you choose a winner or a fan, then you have to follow that person for the rest of your life. So I appreciate that I was able to choose and then also evolve my own definition. I don't think that being a fan of one thing makes me an enemy of others. And I think I can be a fan of many other things in different moments in my life.
That makes sense. And so then part of what grabbed you about Nadal is that you didn't necessarily have to be anti Roger Federer,
exactly,
or Novak Djokovic. You could just be a fan of how Nadal showed up and played that sport. And you talked about sportsmanship. Can you give me an example of a way he shows up that you say, oh, I like that, I learned from that?
Yeah, so sports taught me a lot about business. And this is because when I grew up playing multiple sports, and I learned certain values about discipline, about not giving up, about also learning how to lose. And I try to apply that to my life. I try to lead by example. I try to work hard. I know not all the decisions are right, but I know I have the ability to repair. And I've seen that in certain athletes, not in all of them. But like what I saw in this particular athlete is that he was really a good human being, and that's something I aspire to be too. So obviously, sports has a lot of like impact in many decisions, but I tend to think that sports brings a lot of healthy attitudes and values, and I'm trying to pick the ones that I like the most and apply them to my own daily life.
I know Nadal has not always met with success. He's definitely in some big spots. He's had to struggle with injury. He's had some really long matches. If I remember correctly, he had like a 5-hour match one day, and then the next day he had to go back out there. Tell me a story, right? If you and I were together and we were sort of maybe debating back and forth the merits of Nadal as a great tennis player, like one story that you really would pull out and be like, no, this right here exemplifies why you should really take notice, and it doesn't have to be against, but just really appreciate for Nadal.
The story that comes to mind is actually that game went over 5 hours. It was a final in Wimbledon against Roger Federer. And I was watching it at home with my parents. And that game went dark. Like nobody could expect that it would last.
Right, I forgot about that. Yeah.
And the players wanted to continue. And the king of Spain was there, and a lot of other like government representatives, celebrities were there. Everyone wanted more and more and more. And that was a celebration of sportsmanship. Because yes, at the end of the day, Nadal won, but like both players hug each other. I saw my dad crying and of emotion. And that to me was something incredible. It transcended the screen, transcended the sport, right? And it showed me how doing the right thing can sometimes pay off in a business sense, but at the same time can really create a very deep connection.
Love that. So your dad was crying. He was like so connected to the effort that the players were putting forth, that it wasn't just, I'm super glad somebody won, but it's that relief, that emotional connection as a human of seeing somebody kind of maybe go beyond their limits perhaps. And that's what you're saying. They were connecting. It was transcending. I love that. That's really cool. I think when you connect sport to business, one of the things that I think about is that it feels to me like many of us are turning to sport over time because sport has finite outcomes. A match is played and you have a winner and you have a loser. A game is played, a season is played, and you have at the end of a champion. But in business, there's sort of no real end. You're always iterating and you're trying to do better each quarter, each year, each decade, right? If you're around for a long period of time. And it's much harder to get the score, right? To really feel like, oh yeah, we totally won. And so when you say you won some lessons from sport that you apply to business, and that notion of trying to get better and iterate is something that you're picking up on, how do you apply that, right? Because you've been at what you're doing for a while. How do you apply that?
Yes, well, I've been building product school for 8 years now, and this is my third venture. I've been in the sport of business
That's
since
so
the
awesome.
beginning. And for me, one thing that I actually learned from sports is the value of community. It gets to a point where how do you really generate those type of emotions? How do you, like I was telling you the story about my dad, like how do you really connect at such a deeper level? Well, I think there is something about bringing people together, both offline and online. So in the business context, what I try to replicate is the creation of an environment, a safe space where people can really help each other out and have a common purpose. In this case, it's product management. I found my passion in this because it's a problem I really care about. Selfishly, I built product school as a solution to my own problem because there was nothing like this when I was trying to get my first product management job. And that really resonated with many other people. But it gets to a point where you can't really be there for everybody at all times. It's a very limited perspective to think that I can be the only one solving everybody's problems. So creating a community where people can help each other out, can invite new members, can engage with existing members, I think that's when the magic happens. Something that I've seen in sports, going to stadiums or going to music events as well, where you sometimes look at someone that maybe you don't know anything about, but you are there for the same purpose. And that creates a deep connection and kind of like a fast friendship or a fast moment of happiness. And I think building this type of communities around businesses, it's a good way to build a long-lasting brand.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think there's the idea that you come up with and the problem you're trying to solve, you have that, right? You identify with it and you start to build product school, and then you build a community because other people have that problem and you connect and you're talking about that. And then as the business matures, some of the people in the community start to graduate to become fans. So how did you start to cultivate that? I mean, I think of you as a very thoughtful leader who's along the way architected really important pieces into your business that people maybe have missed. Like, what did you think about in terms of cultivating those fans from your community and what it wanted to grow up and be for you?
I love that question because I had to look very deep into that before I started my current company. In my previous one, I ended up being burnt out by just spending way too much time talking with investors, trying to raise money from people that never used my product. And in some cases, didn't even care about my product. It was all about spreadsheets and numbers. And I felt that disconnection because when I started my previous company, I did it because I wanted to build something good for my users. But I spent very limited time with those users, very limited time building. I found myself trapped into kind of a hamster wheel that I didn't want. So after that venture, I tried to redefine my definition of happiness, which in this case was, I want to build something that I care about. I want to spend most of my time with the users who at the end of the day are the ones who are going to be using that product. And that means that maybe this is not the biggest business ever. I don't know, but I don't want to start the business thinking that I need to create a public company or a unicorn, and that is what's going to give me the happiness many years down the line. So I've been bootstrapping product school I bootstrapped for almost 7.5 years until we announced our funding round this year, but it was in a much more thoughtful way because company was profitable since the very beginning, was growing at a very healthy rate. And that gave me the option to choose what to do and ended up choosing to raise money. And that was the right decision. I'm happy with the investors that we picked because we picked them instead of being desperate and just choosing whatever only option there was out there just to survive. So coming back to the point about fans, for me, it was all about really building that small community of people who care. Those users who would go through our trainings because they wanted to be product managers and make sure that they actually get those outcomes. I wanted them to be our marketing team. I wanted them to talk about their experience instead of us just having to go out there and say, we're awesome. So keeping that type of magic, that type of quality over quantity is what helped us grow. Maybe we could have grown faster had we raised money earlier in our career, but I don't think the quality and the number of funds would be there.
The word magic. And I think that the interesting thing about real fanatics, whether it's of an athlete or a sports team, or it's an organization like yours, is that there's this sort of difference between, hey, if you ask me about it, I'll say good things. I'll say, oh, product school is cool. It's really interesting. Versus if somebody in my vicinity talks about product management and I hear it, I'm like, hey, have you heard of product school? Right. And in that difference is magic. There's this magic of where you connect with people, right? Like you really fire up something inside of them. As best as you can, what do you think that magic, that feeling that leads to having that connection with product school is? Because you spend so much time with your users. I think of you as a leader who really understands his customer. Can you put into words some of the magic that people feel?
Totally. Well, first, you cannot fake passion, right? This is something that I have for what I do, and I love to see in people that went through our program and talk so passionately about their experience. You can create all the tactics and incentives that you want, but at the end of the day, that doesn't scale. That is not magic. That's just a referral program. So talking about magic, we're in the education business, which means that this has the potential to change people's lives. Like if you really invest in something that you care about, and that also gives you an opportunity to grow in your life, you are going to be forever grateful, hopefully. And that is what we're all about. We want to really connect education with employment. We want our students to talk about their experience, not just because they had a good time learning, but ultimately because this made a very positive impact in their lives.
Connecting education with employment. How do you track that?
That's really hard because this is a lifelong journey. And a lot of people, sometimes they just focus on that next step, which is important. But part of our responsibility is to really show them that whole picture. And yes, we are now at a particular moment in time, and we are going to help them take that next step without losing the perspective. So we track the satisfaction and the return on investment in different ways. One is the actual NPS, the Net Promoter Score. We want to ensure that the students really, really appreciate their experience with us. Number two, we want to track their outcomes, which is really what happened after graduation from product school. And outcomes can be measured in very different ways, because I don't want people to think that the only possible outcome is to get a job that pays you 6 figures tomorrow. That's just not realistic. So, I mean, not for everybody. So outcomes in our cases can be the impact that it has on your own salary over time. Some people use this as an opportunity to get an internal promotion. Some people use this as an opportunity to then get another job. Some people also use this as an opportunity to realize, to validate if this is for them or not. We've seen a lot of people who have the idea about, oh my God, I want to be a product manager because my friends are product managers. So I want to work at one of these big companies. And then they realize that that's actually not what they want today. But going through this experience allows them to understand the different options and then pivot, which is, I think, something very important about being a fan of something. You cannot take fans for granted. Being a fan of something today doesn't mean you have to be a fan of that thing forever and ever.
I love that. I think it's completely true. I think most organizations should be in the business of trying to understand what makes fans and how to keep them. But you do have to be cognizant of the fact that maybe people will graduate out of that stage, right? Maybe people will find that the reason they appreciate you is because you helped them figure out that this wasn't your passion. So what do you do? What mechanisms have you taught yourself in the organization to foster that fandom when it's appropriate, but then allow people graduate on when it's not?
So I love this concept of the super fan. I think thinking of something as a fan, it's almost like finishing a game. And I think the same as lifelong learning, the game never ends, right? You were saying the same about business. And I think it's great because I want to encourage people to think about how you can make a fan a super fan. I think the impact of a fan is much bigger than hundreds of users. Well, the same concept applies. A super fan, the impact of a super fan is much bigger than hundreds of fans. So I think thinking of this in terms of a marathon, like, for me, education is lifelong learning, right? So yes, in particular, we have specific certifications. But the fact that one student took a certification 2 years ago and that helped that person get a job today or 2 years ago, doesn't mean that we are done. They are part of the community. And I can give you examples of how that community has helped each other out. Now we have people who graduated a few years ago who are now leveraging the community to hire next generation product managers, or people who took a more advanced certification down the line because now they want to take that next step in their career. Like it's important for the business. We have a responsibility to really create an environment where there are opportunities for those fans to thrive and continue moving up. Otherwise, they're going to feel limited, and eventually they may leave.
This is interesting because in your organization, with education as a mindset, you need to continue feeding them, right? There has to be a place where they can continue to grow and expand their knowledge through you. Otherwise, I think what I'm hearing you say is that they might graduate beyond. And that must give you a little bit of a challenge to think about how deep do you go in certain content areas in order to foster what might be a small percentage of your customer base, but the people who represent those super fans. And this is where a lot of organizations end up struggling, making ROI cases, right? Trying to figure out how does this fit the bottom line? How do you discern, okay, 90% of my content is for people who are going to go maybe steps 1 through 8, but then 10% is the people who are going to take steps 9 and 10 and then actually teach us what step 11 looks like because they need even more from us. How do you discern and then prioritize and give resources to that, potentially mismatch of math?
Well, we actually involve fans or super fans in the decision-making process, which I think is very important at this point because they actually know more about what they want to do next than us if we are not paying attention to what's really happening. So when I started the company, we started very, very small and focused on aspiring product managers, people who are not actively working as PM yet, that need help with that final push. And then what we realized through our own fans is that some of them wanted more because they already got the job. But that doesn't mean that that's it, right? Like you might want a promotion, you might want to create your own company, you might want something else. So that also inspired us to realize that we wanted to be a partner in that journey because the journey is there. It was our decision to be part of it or not. But what's clear is that in education or in business, majority of people want to continue growing. And that means that maybe the content that you need at a later stage in your career is different, or maybe the format is different, right? We can't expect that everyone will always learn by taking a course or reading a book or watching a documentary. There are so many different formats, but involving the fans in the creation and allowing them the different options, it's really, really important. Now, that brings a lot of challenges, as you said, because how do you really provide a personal experience to someone who joined today who might not have the context about the story of the company, they just want a job, versus someone who's been in the community for many, many years, who knows everybody and really wants to get that next promotion? Well, that is, I think that at that point is the magic of data, is the magic of the team, is really treating the community and the business as a product. I'm a product person at heart. So for me, this is exciting to identify the different user personas, right? Different types of users that are part of the community and try to create experiences or tracks that are really appropriate for them.
When you're doing this, you use the term data and you use the term listen to our super fans. And sometimes people think that listening to customers and data are different, but I think that what you're saying is that they're related, that the listening to your super fans allows you to create data. How do you go about listening to them?
Well, by literally talking to them directly. I think there is no replacement for that. I can spend hours looking at pivot tables, right, and trying to come up with my own analysis, which, by the way, it's important, but it's not the whole picture. And especially for super fans, we're talking about people who've been there with you since the very beginning, who really care, who really build together. They appreciate this type of personal touch. That's one way actually to nurturing your super fans. But number two, they actually bring a lot of value, because the idea of creating a second program for existing product managers wasn't mine. I had the first idea of a program for aspiring PMs. The second one came from the super fans. And it made so much sense, but I don't think I could have seen it without being involved in that process with them.
That's awesome. So tell me more about that. Tell me the story of how that came out from your super fans and what you had to do to meet their needs.
Well, when I started, I was the instructor of all the classes. So for the first year and a half or so, I was literally teaching everybody. I knew everybody by the name. They knew me. I was making introductions between students and companies hiring. So I was really, really involved in making sure that some of the students would become super fans. So by having that connection, at some point they would come back. This is maybe 1-2 years later, saying, hey, I made it. I'm now a senior PM or a director of product, and I want to hire a junior PM for my team. Where should I go? And the first time, maybe the reaction is like, well, let me introduce you to my 2 other super fans who I think are awesome and see where they are, right? But it gets to a point where it just doesn't scale, right? And when you keep receiving similar feedback, I think as entrepreneurs or creators, we sometimes connect those dots and understand patterns. So that was multiple ideas there. The other piece to that was that a lot of these people said, hey, I'm also applying for senior level roles and I'm having a roadblock. Like the stuff that I learned was great for when I was looking for the first job, but now I don't know what else I should do. And maybe it's not a course, right? Maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's coaching, maybe something else. So again, by talking to the students, by seeing that pain, living it together, that helped me kind of come up with a potential solution. And that's exactly the same pattern that we follow today. Like 8 years later, and many more students and members of the community, I still know a lot of the members by their name. They still know me, and we still try to have some conversations to try to co-create what's next.
Co-creating what's next, I think, is a theme that's coming up as I'm talking to people. There are two pieces that I hear pretty regularly. So one is, fans adopt your history and your story and they start to tell it, right? It becomes something that they like to share. They become part of. The more they tell the story, the more they feel connected. And the second piece is thinking that the future is exciting and they're on board for it and that they can be involved in it. And in particular with yours, where you've got this huge aspiration of helping everybody stay educated. It's a lifelong journey. And then connecting education to employment. You're getting this feedback loop from people who are like, great, you got me my first job, but I want you to help me get my second or my eighth, right? My next. And you start to hear from these folks that's where you have really lit a fire for them. It's like, okay, we agree, it's lifelong. And as a result, you need to take some deeper steps with me. How, in those first early days, did you ensure that the superfan guidance of what you were creating and then the feedback about whether or not it was hitting the mark was meeting your standards, right? What I mean is that there's some editorial aspect of taking the feedback in from the superfans and thinking about what you do, especially when what you do is education of them. So how did you kind of edit that yourself? How did you think about that?
It is so tempting to do the wrong thing because I see opportunities almost everywhere, right? Like there are people telling you, I want to get a second job. There are companies saying, I want to recruit product managers. There are companies saying, I want consulting services. Like there are people saying, and now I also want other type of skills like design or data. So it gets to a point where you also have to make your own decisions. And first of all, given our bandwidth and resources, it forced us to be very, very intentional about the very few decisions opportunities we could go for. And second thing is, we were talking about magic before. I wanted to keep our magic. And what makes product school magical is a few things. One is the quality of the instructors. Every single person who teaches a product school is not a teacher. They are practitioners, product leaders who are actively working at companies such as Google, Facebook, Airbnb, or Netflix. So that to us is core. No matter what you are learning at product school, you are going to learning from the best. The second piece is the live interaction. Yes, we are an online school, but that doesn't mean that this is fully on demand. That means is that we can have live interactions like the ones you and I are having right now. So we wanted to keep those components intact, plus the focus on product management. We knew that we couldn't just branch out and start teaching everything to everyone. So with that in mind, we just had to place our bets. And our bets were, we want to be the absolute best in product, and we want to be able to go deep, because just helping people top of the funnel to get a job is not going to be enough. And there are some macro trends that are also supporting this. It's not just, oh, I have an idea and I've done a couple of interviews with super fans. We are seeing how the evolution of a lot of companies like yours and others that are incredibly successful. They are building digital experiences for companies that are not just in the high-tech industry. They are like, this is building digital products is everywhere. It's for everybody. And then the other part that we saw with this product management is that it's happening across every single level of the org chart. Like organizations are not just hiring product managers. They are also hiring directors of product, VPs, chief product officers, and that is pushing everyone to want to kind of join this. So I wish I could say, yes, we took every single idea and built something for it, but I think we had to be very, very thoughtful and just place our bets.
I think what I'm hearing you say is that you had to establish some principles for what you wanted to be and what you wanted to be good at. so that you could, with those principles, take in feedback from super fans and say, okay, well, that fits and it adheres. Yes, this is about going deeper with product. Or no, it doesn't fit. That's a really great idea, but we're not going to go into this other area of education called marketing, for example. And so having those principles gives you kind of like boundaries where you're going to listen to the feedback. How involved in the process of creating those principles did you make the superfans?
Super involved. And this is because what you just described are basically the same principles for product management.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of involving the customer, listening to their needs, and at the same time saying no to a lot of different things is exactly what we did at our business. So this is something I've been building, is something I've been doing my entire life. Talking with customers is something that I enjoy. So I take that as a very important data point. That's not the only one. I live and breathe this every single day as an entrepreneur. So I'm also looking at what's happening in the market. I'm also looking at what other companies in the product ecosystem are doing. I'm also looking at data and listening to my team members, customer support, education, sales. So with all of these data points combined, then we have to place our bets. And by the way, some of those were wrong. And that's also another principle in product management, right? Like at some point, how much information is enough for you to move forward? Well, it's never going to be enough. Like you probably have to call a shot at some point and know that the same way fans are not there forever, you can also change your mind and evolve.
You get right into where I wanted to take this, which is sometimes you let your fans down. Sometimes you make mistakes. What's an example of a place where you, looking back on the last 8 years, have made a mistake and let your fans down? And then what did you do about it?
Well, we actually tried to branch out into different skills. I remember first time blockchain was hot. This is maybe
the first time we're
yes.
here in 2022. So what are we on the 7th time?
Yeah, when Bitcoin hit $10,000, and so it was a moment where everyone thought that, oh my God, banks are going down, crypto is there. We ran an experiment, which was to create a course about blockchain for product managers. We thought this was going to be something for the future, and maybe it is, but definitely I was in the right time. So we ran a few cohorts, and we did it based on feedback from some of our super fans and other macro trends. And then we realized that the quality wasn't there. At least it wasn't the same level of quality as our bread and butter certifications in product. And it was hard to pull the plug so early because we put so much effort into that. I actually took the course as a student. I was very interested in learning more about blockchain. And then I realized as a student that this wasn't exactly what we wanted. And yeah, there's always the option to invest and make it better. But there was something else that just wasn't clear. And I think it was in general, like the topic that we wanted to teach wasn't that, there were not that many business applications at that point. Now there's another wave, so we'll see what happens. But that taught us the lesson of, hey, we're not always going to get it right. And I wish I had got it right because we put a lot of money and time into this. But better to do it now and justify why, not just to the fans, but to the team. So then we could go and reinvent ourselves, which is exactly what we did. That led us to create more advanced certifications within product management. I don't think I would have been able to make that decision without that initial failure.
And I think that is such a common theme. It's not that you aren't ever going to let your fans down. It's not that you're going to be perfect in their eyes all the time, but when those opportunities to learn from your failures pop up, if you make it easy for your fans to talk to you, if you make it easy for them to give you input on where you should be going next and to tell you about those failures, then you can course correct and you might deliver, even more value and when they're trusted in a more meaningful way. So I want to ask this question. It's sort of leading, but you upset some people, you frustrated some people in that, and then you changed and you went in a certain direction as a result. What happened with those fans? Did they get more loyal? Did they trust you more?
I think those are like incredible opportunities to show type of leadership and values for your company. For us, for me, it was about owning that failure. And the first reaction was to recognize that to the early adopters of that experiment that we were running. And I was one of them, actually. So process a full refund to everybody and say, hey, this was my expectation. We couldn't deliver. I'm sorry. I own it. Of course, here's your refund. I'm here, right? I think this is business 101 is the first step, although not all the business maybe would approach it that way. And number two is to show that you are a human, right? Like, what are you going to do about it? Like, are you going to punish that person forever because they try something? Well, maybe you lose some fans or super fans. Maybe they weren't the right super fans for you in the long term. In the same way, the user has the opportunity to be a fan for the next stage. The business should have the right to choose who they want as fans. So I think obviously it's not that we chose, okay, you didn't have a good experience, we don't want you as a fan anymore, but we reinforced who supported us and said, okay, I get it, and this makes you even more human, so I want to be part of this. And at the same time, we lost some people who said, well, thank you, but this is what I expected and I'm gone. Well, I think it's part of business. I think I don't want to forget about anybody. I want to have empathy for users, and I wish I could make everyone a fan. But the reality is, it's impossible. At least I haven't been able to figure out a way to make every single user a fan.
Well, I think you have to have strong opinions in order to build fanatical relationships. There has to be some strong sense of connection. And that means that you're going to have a point of view that also turns people off in a strong and meaningful way, I think. I think it's the other side. So when you say you can't make everybody a fan, even if you'd like to, I'm like, yeah, I think that's part and parcel of actually committing to winning fans, is having a strong point of view. So we talked about you being a fan of Nadal. And I think as you've been talking about some of the things that you've done to course correct and to own the results and the outcomes you've had with customers, I think I see some of what you were talking about in terms of sportsmanship and effort showing up. So that's really interesting. How conscious of you, of your desire to kind of learn from him and be like him are you on a regular basis when you are interacting with your customers? Like, those things sit in your head?
I think that by playing sports for such a long time, all of these things come natural to me. The certain values about working hard, having discipline, apologizing, respecting the team, all of that. At the same time, there's so many other things that I'm trying to learn. For example, having awareness and empathy for people who are not in the room. It's something that I had to learn the hard way by moving everyone online. Like, I thought that I had a good read of the situation when everyone was in the same room. But as the business gets bigger, there are certain people who join that I am not interviewing directly, right? And they're doing very meaningful work. And I get to know a little bit later when they join the company. And I've never met in person. So for me, it was a very humbling experience to realize that some of the mental models and values that I took from playing sports were helpful in business, and some of them had to be evolved and some of them had to be incorporated.
We've talked a lot about fans. We've talked about some of the mistakes that you've made along the way. What is the quickest way to lose you as a fan?
For me, it's all about deep inside being a good person. Like, really, and I also work on giving people the benefit of the doubt and really approaching situations from a place of curiosity and empathy, and give everyone a fair shot. Now, I understand people go through stuff, and sometimes bad behavior doesn't mean being a bad person. So with that in mind, for me, in order to really have a healthy relationship with a team member, with a client, with a community member, I want to know that we both come from a good place. We might not be right sometimes, we may not see eye to eye, but we both come with good intentions.
And given how much time you spend with product management and technology organizations, how do products show up that way in order to demonstrate that they have good intent? Like, maybe the other side of this is, how do product companies end up losing you?
Well, the beautiful thing about digital products is that you can iterate very quickly, right? You can collect feedback you can really understand what's happening at an individual level and then make a decision if you want to course correct or not. So for me, even with digital products, what really turns me off is the support, like the interaction with the humans behind a digital product. I can give you an example about this racket that I actually bought yesterday. I was watching a lot of YouTube videos on a channel that I love. And those videos about tennis were always shot from the same store, which is not too far from where I live. So I was so excited to go there yesterday and finally buy something from that store. But the person who took care of me wasn't very friendly. Maybe he had a bad day, and just turned me off because I had such a high expectation. I was a fan in a way, but I just didn't have that same offline experience that I usually have online. So I actually left the store without buying. Went, bought a coffee, and then I thought about it, and I came back 1 hour later, and I said, you know what? Maybe he had a bad day. I don't want to let this, deviate me. And ended up buying the racket. And anyway, this is just shows an example of like people matter, and nothing. It's not just about building digital things. Like at the end of the day, they're humans behind the scene, and every single interaction with support, with sales, with anyone, kind of demonstrates a lot about the company. And sometimes we only have one shot. So it's very important to keep in mind that we have to always do the right thing.
Because while you are 100% correct, a lot of times there's only one shot. It also demonstrates that because you had already gotten to a point where you're expecting the experience to be good, you had a little bit more leeway. And it sounds to me, based on our conversation today and talking about this, you're the kind of person who is more likely to be empathetic and give people another chance. But you already had something that made you buy into that store. You didn't have a great experience, but you kind of walked away and came back and said, well, regardless of that experience, I'm gonna invest. And I think that's out there for a lot of people, right? I think a lot of us want people to be better, and we want to forgive others for making mistakes around some of the experiences, and having a bad day certainly should be, minimized as much as possible, but it's not inevitable. And there's still room when you have fans to have that empathy. So, well, this wraps up what I wanted to explore with you. Super awesome. Thank you for joining us. I'm really curious for our audience. What should they be visiting to learn more about Product School and all the great work you do?
Well, the easiest way to find about us is just to go to our website. By the way, 90% of the things that we do are absolutely free and available to everybody. We really eat what we preach. We say we drink our own champagne, which means that we really try to put education out there, and anyone is invited to join our free events or conferences or books or discussion forum. Everything is there, no strings attached. If someone wants to connect with me personally, I'm very active on social media, especially on LinkedIn.
Yes, and I can attest to that for sure. So we will, in the notes to this, send out some of the links to your site and you on LinkedIn and in social as well. And we cannot recommend Product School enough. I think it's an awesome community, and it's certainly very necessary. And we've met a lot of fans as a result of being in the product management space ourselves. So thank you to everybody for tuning in, and be sure to like and give us some feedback via the reviews so that we can continue to tailor this podcast to our biggest fans. Have a great day.